Hi everyone. Let's discuss the riveting plot of this novel today. The female protagonist is living what appears to be a life of luxury in the king's palace, yet she's consumed by loneliness and confusion. The king's concern for her is inconsistent and elusive. Terif, her rescuer, has landed in hot water as a result. Meanwhile, the other generals have varying attitudes toward her. Some are indifferent, others curious, and a few even hostile. When she attempts to comprehend the rules of this world, she encounters obstacles and restrictions at every turn. How will she confront these challenges and discover herself worth in this foreign land? Chapter 13. The chambers provided by the king were more opulent than anything I had ever experienced. A series of interconnected rooms stretched before me, each more lavish than the last. Tall wooden archways framed the entrances, while long windows lined the back wall. Though they were now obscured by a thick layer of snow and ice, I stood just inside the doorway, my eyes wide with wonder. The sheer size of these chambers dwarfed the modest home I had shared with 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐩𝐭 and 𝐿𝐼𝐻 back in our village. The first room boasted a cozy seating area, complete with a large fireplace and plush chairs arranged around a small table. I tried to maintain my composure, but I cowled and helped feeling overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding me. Dragging my heavy trunk into the room, I closed the door behind me with trembling hands. The warmth from the fireplace, likely lit by a thoughtful servant, enveloped me like a comforting embrace. I pulled my luggage through the archway into the spacious bedchamber, where an enormous bed dominated the center of the room. A weary sigh escaped my lips at the sight of the inviting blankets and pillows. My body, exhausted from the journey, yearned for rest. However, my attention was quickly drawn to a smaller room off to the side. A marble-laden washroom greeted my eyes, steam rising from a full bare, clawed tub. I turned slowly, taking in the pristine whiteness and elegant fixtures. The glistening marble made me feel unworthy, like an underling who had mistakenly wandered into a realm of opulence. Shaking off my insecurities, I reminded myself that the king had chosen these chambers for me. I was allowed, expected, even to enjoy the luxuries offered. The warm bathwater called to me, promising relief for my weary bones. The plush white towel sat folded on the marble countertop, accompanied by a thick, long-sleeved dark blue dress that looked incredibly comfortable. I hesitated, chewing on my bottom lip. While I had brought my own clothes from the lower kingdom, I wondered if the dress was a gift or perhaps a subtle hint that my attire was unsuitable for the castle. Pushing aside my doubts, I quickly shed my thick cloak, green tunic, and black cotton pants. As I sank into the welcoming warmth of the bath, a contented moan escaped my lips. "Ah, so good," I murmured, allowing the soothing water to wash away the fatigue of my journey. Quiet hair, silent hair. Was it always going to be this eerie? I spent longer than necessary in the water, but the soaps resting on the ledge beside me were too inviting, and felt like silk against my sore, dirty skin. I didn't climb out of the tub until the water had turned cold and brown from the dirt I had scrubbed from my skin and hair. The soft towel felt like heaven against my damp, pink skin as I dried the water from my body. The air was still chilly, despite the heat from the fireplace filling my chambers, and I quickly reached for the thick blue dress. If it was a gift, refusing to wear it would be beyond rude. And if it wasn't, well, I would have to deal with my wardrobe some other time. The dress fabric was soft and snug against my skin, and instantly forced the cold from my aching limbs. I blinked up into the large mirror over the marble wash basin, and frowned. I looked sad, tired and upset. I was sad that Terif was blaming himself for what happened, upset that he felt like he deserved to be punished, and sad that the king barely even glanced my way, like I was nothing. Honestly, I was nothing, just a peasant girl with no true family and a strange energy that tried to kill her. The thought had barely flitted through my mind when a loud knock sounded on the main door. I jumped at the unexpected sound and tried not to frown before hurriedly running the towel through my wet hair. It was getting late. Beyond late, really. And I doubted I would be seeing Terif again for a while. Nerves suddenly raced through my body. Was it the king? Did he come to talk like I had so desperately wanted before? I stopped just behind the entrance door, my heart pounding in my chest as butterflies raced through my stomach. I let out a ragged breath. I could do this. So what if it was the king? We've had conversations before. Nothing to worry about. I brushed my damp hair over my shoulder before reaching slowly for the handle and easing the door open. One of the large wolf-borns who had been in the room with the king on our arrival was staring down at me, his dark brown eyes flickering as they scanned over my face. My own gaze widened in surprise. Definitely not who I was expecting. See, can I help you? I asked in surprise as what I can only assume was another general leaned casually against the door frame in front of me. His brown eyes flashed until they seemed to glow like Terif's head before his lips pulled up a fraction at the corners. The king has invited you to dine with him. I will bring you there, if you would like. My heart stuttered at his words, and I was quickly nodding my acceptance before I even realized it. I was surprised at the soft chuckle that passed the wolf's lips, at the amusement lighting his eyes. He already seemed so different than the general I had grown accustomed to. He seemed friendly. His hair was the color of wet sand, and his dark eyes glowed in the dim light of the castle as he gave me a small bow. I am the king's beta and second in command, but you may call me 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐻. My lady, second in command, whoa. First Terif, and now him. I figured the king would have them doing something far more important than escorting me everywhere, especially with how high up in rank they were. I quickly gave him a little curtsy and small smile as he stepped away from the door and gestured into the hall, his lips pulling into a small grin of their own. Immerse. I murmured politely and tried to keep my gaze lowered respectfully as I stepped into the hallway. 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐻 closed the door softly behind me. Yes, I am aware. I felt that embarrassed he tries to my cheeks at his soft chuckle, and avoided his gaze as I began to quickly braid my damp hair. Of course he would know who I was. How embarrassing. I brushed the braid behind my back and bit my lip anxiously as I followed his large back down the hall. 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐻 seemed nice enough, but he was such a stark difference from Terif already. I had a sickening feeling I would actually miss the general's rude bipolar attitude. I hoped the king hadn't done something terrible to him. He seemed worried. My eyes widened and snapped to the large wolf, born at my side as his dark eyes hissed down at me in something close to a warm concern. Well, that was something I definitely was used to. Terif was hardly the one to ever start a conversation before, and the king and I usually just stared at each other. No, I'm just nervous, I guess. I answered softly as he led me down a flight of marble stairs and into that beautiful statue hallway from before. 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐻 gave me a warm smile. Don't be. The king acts like he denies it, but I know he's been anxious for your arrival. He is happy you are here. I cowed and stopped the bright flicker of hope that ignited in my chest at his words. The king of the north was happy that I was here, in his castle, with him. A ridiculously happy smile crossed my face. Maybe we would get to spend time together after all. I followed the king's second in command a little further down the hall before he stopped in front of a large oak door and knocked softly against the hardwood. Enter. Eric's voice reached my ears almost immediately, and my chest clenched around my rapidly beating heart. I would never get used to how my body reacted to that beautiful sound. 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐻 shot me one last smile before opening the door and ushering me inside the dimly lit room. My eyes widened in awe. The chamber was definitely designed for dining, and held a long, dark wooden table with more than a handful of chairs sitting on either side. The king sat at the far end, a plate already in front of him, as well as one in front of the chair at his side. His head lifted out entrance, and my breath caught in my throat when that lightning gaze locked on mine. Thank you. 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐻. You may leave. North. The general nodded and gave me another small bow and smile before turning to leave the room once again, the door closing heavily behind him. I bit my lip nervously. It felt like years since I've seen him in person, when it's barely been more than one moon. My stomach was a fluttering mess, I am sorry for acting so short earlier. The king started softly, his blue eyes staring shivering holes into mine as he stood slowly from his chair. I did not mean to upset you. A small smile pulled at my lips at the concern shining through his dark gaze. It's all right, I murmured softly as he leaned casually against the table. I was sure how to feel. To tell the truth, I was upset he was going to let Terif beg to be punished, and I was upset he dismissed me so brusquely. But I understood why he was upset about the whole attack, especially since my skull had apparently been broken. But that still didn't put Terif at fault. He didn't deserve to be punished. It was silent between us for a few long seconds as a thin layer of tension filled the air. Neither of us moved from that intense lock, gaze we always seemed to share. The king was the first to break the quiet. Come, little 𝐿𝐿𝐬, you must be hungry. His deep voice was soft as he turned and pulled the chair beside his out for me. My cheeks burned brightly as I gave him a small nod before walking over to the large table. Thank you, I murmured as he pushed the chair in for me before sitting down himself, a small smile pulling at his full lips. I forced my eyes to glance down at the food in front of us instead of staring up at him as desperately as I wanted to. The rumors of his beauty did not do him justice. He was by far the most handsome man I had ever met, and he seemed so far out of reach. I let my mind wander to the table in front of us. There was an assortment of different foods, all sitting on platters around our plates, just begging to be eaten. My stomach growled at the sight, and the king chuckled. Eat. That one word had me complying almost instantly, and I was reaching up to pull various foods onto my plate without any further urging. Beside a few pieces of bread, Terif and I hadn't eaten at all that day, or the day before. I was beyond hungry. The food was delicious. The fruits were perfectly sweet, the meats and vegetables nicely seasoned, and the dim light from the fireplace only seemed to make it look 10 times better. We both ate in silence for a few long minutes. Despite the desperate urge, I had to stare up at him and never glance away. Was your time enjoyable in the lower kingdom? He asked once the hungry monster in my stomach had subsided and I sat back in my seat with the water glass clutched firmly in my hand. I gave him a small smile, but refused to glance up at his bright blue eyes. I cowled and risked getting lost in them. What little I did there. Yes, I enjoyed it. Besides 2 days of wandering the market with May, I hadn't done anything in the lower kingdom. Most of the week I had been stuck in my room because of my ankle, and then carted back to the north after I had almost died. Terif had saved me, and not he was in trouble for something he couldn't control. My smile slowly disappeared and the king let out a soft sigh. Do not worry about the general. Little 𝐿𝐬, I will not do anything to him. I was surprised he knew what I was thinking, and even more so at the sudden heavy weight that lifted from my chest. My smile returned as I raised my glass to my lips. How did he save me? I murmured against my cup before taking a small sip. His eyes flickered up to mine before glancing back across the room, his jaw clenching and unclenching. There are some things that are too complicated to explain in one conversation. I will tell you, in time. Despite the electric warmth that surged through me at his voice, it only made me frown. Terif never told me anything, and now the king would lend how perfect. There was a moment of silence before he let out a soft sigh and leaned a little towards me. My heart fluttered at the action. And what about when we were on the ship? How were you there? I knew I had a fool's heart to even hope he would answer my questions. 𝐿𝐻 made it more than obvious he plans on keeping his secrets to himself. His bright eyes flickered and he leaned heavily back in his seat. That is one of the things I cannot tell you, yet. I only frowned and kept my eyes cast away from him. I felt as clouded and kept in the dark as the shifters on the base of the mountain. Then again, that was all I was to him. An underling. I know what happened was not Terif's fault, but you have to understand. He started softly, his blue eyes glowing in the dim lighting of the room as he leaned forward again, my questions no longer leering in tension above our heads. You cannot die. I could not handle it if you died. My heart seemed to skip at his words, my breath sitting heavily in my chest as I gazed over at his soul, shattering eyes. What was he saying? I know we do not know each other. He spoke low, his voice deep as it shook through every part of me. And I know that I wanted to keep you away. But you can't possibly imagine what I felt when you bumped your head. His blue eyes flashed dangerously at his words and his jaw clenched in anger before he broke our intense gaze and glanced away. I want to keep you close, to ensure that nothing like that will ever happen again. And that's what I plan to do. My chest was thumping wildly at his words, at the meaning behind them. He wanted to keep me close to him. It might not be the exact "I want you in my life" as my maid admittance that I would have liked, but it was a close second. I was just happy he wanted me near him. I cowed and kept the smile from my lips, and just like that, all the hope bubbling inside my chest evaporated, and my smile slowly fell. I should have realized there would be a catch. There always seemed to be one with him. I still do not want anyone to know about you. It is too risky, especially now that you are staying in the castle. There are people who don't belong here, people I have to keep my eye on. His words made me frown, and the saddened look in his eyes didn't help anything either. He was a king of the North. If he was worried about someone, he would eradicate them. I didn't understand why he would let them run his kingdom freely. I just want you to understand this in case we don't see each other for a long while. A long while. Then I don't believe you should wander the castle without one of my generals with you. It would raise too many questions from too many unwanted lips if they saw an underling wandering freely around my home. An underling. There it was again. That word. I never missed how distasteful it sounded when it left Terif's lips or the king's. That was all I was to them. To him. And that's what I probably always would be. I understand. I whispered softly as the sound of crackling fire wood and flames floated around us. I was too afraid to speak any louder, too afraid that he would be able to sense the hurt ringing through me. I shouldn't have been feeling that way. I should have been thankful just for staying in his castle. I was never supposed to have him anyways. Little Immerse. His deep voice started softly, his eyes still sad as his hand reached up and brushed gently over my cheek. Warmth spread through me at his touch, but I couldn't bring myself to look up at him, to look into those bright eyes. Don't look so sad. This is for the best, to keep you safe. His voice had turned into a soft, gentle murmur, and his blue eyes tried to look reassuring as I forced a smile on my lips. No, I didn't. But I would say anything to make him change the subject. The longer I thought about it, the sadder it made me. His dark eyes stared unhappily over at me for a moment before he blinked and let out a soft sigh. It is getting late. He spoke low as his warm hand fell from my cheek and he pulled away. You must be exhausted. I will have 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐬 lead you back to your chambers. I cowed and stopped the small frown from pulling on my lips as he stood slowly to his feet before easing my chair back for me. Our conversation always ended just barely after it began, and he seemed to always want to leave in a hurry. His words before weighed heavily on my heart. He spoke as if he truly did care about me, and yet he never seemed to want to be around me for too long, to have to deal with me for too long. I blinked when the door to the dining hall suddenly opened, and a smiling 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬 entered. Are you ready, my lady? He didn't bother addressing the king, which I found rather odd. But I didn't comment as I nodded and walked towards his outstretched arm. I gave his beaming smile a small one of my own. Before I forget Immerse, I would like to introduce you to the rest of my generals tomorrow. His voice didn't hold room for argument, but the questioning look in his blue eyes let me know he was ultimately leaving the decision up to me. I could only nod at him before turning back to 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬, whose large smile was slowly fading. Sleep well, Eric called softly after us, the haunting tone in his voice pulling at my heartstrings. You too. I murmured back at him before allowing 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬 to casually slip his arm through mine and lead me away. Chapter 14. 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬 let out a dark chuckle beside me. Don't look so nervous, Lady Immerse. They won't bite. They were wolf-borns. Generals at that. I was beyond positive they would bite if they needed to. But I didn't bother voicing my thoughts. I was too nervous to speak anyway. I knew none of them would hurt me. The king wouldn't allow that to happen. But the brief glance I had of the generals from the day before was enough to terrify the whole lower kingdom. And Terif had made it perfectly clear how his kind viewed underlings. What would they say? Were they all as blunt as the 𝐾𝐿? If this is truly too much for you, I will tell the king you are not feeling well. The large wolf at my side spoke softly, calmly, like he could visibly see the inner turmoil raging through me. No, they weren't all as blunt as Terif. 𝐿𝐢𝐳 was very sweet, and very kind. No, I'm okay. I tried to give the male at my side a reassuring smile, but the worried frown on his lips did not ease. He took a deep breath and glanced away. I have told him throwing you into our culture so soon is not a good idea, but he is convinced you will be able to handle it. And you are not. I asked softly as the general led me down the grand hall and towards the large set of marble stairs sitting beautifully at the entrance of castle. I glanced slowly around. I hadn't been to this part of the castle yet, but it was just as beautiful as the rest of the palace. I think. He paused and licked his lips before stopping at the top of the porcelain white stairs. He turned to me with dark brown eyes glowing in the dim light. I think you would be able to adapt to anything you wanted to. But that does not mean it won't take time. He gave me a crooked smile before stepping down onto the stairs and holding out his hand. I gave him a thankful smile of my own and placed my palm in his as he helped me down the stairs. The deep green dress I wore was so different and lighter than my usual wardrobe, but that didn't mean it was hard to walk in. Sometimes it's better to be thrown into water when learning how to swim than taking hours wading in the shallows. It was an odd saying, but one the elders and teachers of our village would use frequently. The 𝐿𝐲 let go of my hand at the base of the stairs and turned for the hall off to the side with a scoff. And sometimes you drown. We stayed quiet after that, although the rest of the walk was relatively short. In all honesty, I had no idea how fast I would be able to take in their culture, or if I would at all. Everything was so different, so unique. It made me truly feel like my village of 1,000 years their inferior. Or maybe that was just the confidence and authority they all seemed to radiate. I let out a shaky breath when 𝐿𝐲 pulled to a stop in front of a large wooden door stairwell, my fists shaking nervously at my side. I was officially going to meet all 6 of King of the Northwest generals. No shifter at the base of the mountain or lower kingdom would ever find themselves in this position and live to talk about it, that is. This is your last chance. My lady, I can escort you back to your room if you would like. The second in command spoke softly. I assumed so the others on the other side wouldn't hear. I gave him a grateful smile. Thank you, but I would rather just get it over with. He stared down at me a moment more before nodding and giving me a smile of approval. He didn't bother knocking like last time, and instead just opened and held the door for me. Like the day before, the loud, deep, male voices filling the hall instantly quieted as I stepped into the large room, one long table resting in the center. I was starting to suspect all rooms in the castle held such tables. 𝐿𝐲𝐬, thank you for joining us. The king's voice was like a bolt of lightning straight to my heart. And despite the automatic pull I felt towards him, he was little distraction from the inhuman eyes staring straight at me. My eyes flickered briefly to his bright blues as he slowly stood from the chair at the head of the table. A flash of gold caught my vision, and I paused as my gaze landed on Terif. I was surprised at the relieved sigh that left my lips. He appeared perfectly fine. The emotionless but rather grumpy mask over his face, but fine nonetheless. A heavy weight suddenly lifted from my chest. As soon as the king stood tall on his feet, the large wolf, born surrounding the table, did as well. My eyes widened at the sight, at the view of 5 very large, very strange men standing side by side. I tried not to make it too obvious that I was easing closer towards 𝐿𝐲𝐬. I watched with wide, nervous eyes as Eric walked slowly towards us, his beautiful gaze flashing brightly against the light of the room. My heart nearly died when he paused in front of us and held his large hand out to me, a small smile trying to pull at his lips. My body moved on its own accord, my mind focused on his almost smile, on the way his eyes shined brightly down at me, and I slipped my hand unconsciously into his. My breath caught in my throat as that almost smile turned into a real one. This way, little wet, little one. I didn't bristle at the name. Not like when 𝐊𝐿𝐲 or any other villagers felt it necessary to put little in front of whatever they called me. Compared to the king and all other wolf-borns I had met, I was little. I followed him obediently. My mind solely focused on the fact that he was holding my hand and smiling over at me. This was the most at ease I had ever seen him, and knowing that he was acting so in front of his generals was mind-blowing. 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸 walked slowly behind us until he stood directly beside the only unused chair at the table, the one right next to the king's, the second-in-command seat. I cowled and stopped my hand from shaking slightly in the king's gentle grip as he eased me to a stop right in front of all their unwavering gazes. These are my generals. Men I trust with my life, and now yours. One will always be near you when I am not. I wanted to cry in disappointment when his hand slipped from mine and he stood a step behind me, so I was the certain of attention. I bit my lip nervously. Hello. As if on cue. All 6 of the large wolf-borns in front of us placed their right arm across their chest and bowed toward us, even Terif and 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸. My stomach still twisted with 1,000 different nauseating nerves. I recognized the 2 from the other day, and the one that made the comment about how I was the famous Immerse. The man's dark green eyes seemed to be a light in never ending amusement. 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸 was his name, I think. The other general who had shoved him through the door stood directly beside him, his eyes as dark as the black hair resting softly against his forehead. You already know, Terif. The king's words seemed to be a gentle murmur in my ear, even though he stood proud and strong beside me and his voice was heard by all in the room. My eyes flickered over to my previous traveling companion, only to find his golden eyes hard as ice as they stared over at me, like he could practically see how nervous I was and didn't care. And 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸 has been guiding you since your arrival. I let my gaze flicker over to the beaming second-in-command and gave him a small smile as he shot me a sly wink. The king didn't seem to care or notice. Delos is in control over castle and grounds security. The general standing beside Terif gave me a short nod, his dark brown hair swaying casually across his shoulders like it had a mind of its own. His eyes were a striking auburn color as they gazed over at me, a hard suspicion clouding his gaze. I tried to position the king between him and I as best as I could. The wolf-born was beautiful, but rather frightening, and I believe 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸 has already taken the liberty to introduce himself yesterday. There was no mistaking the slight tinge of venom in the king's tone, or the flash of anger in his blue eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸 gave me a sheepish smile as his dark eyes twinkled in that never-ceasing amusement. Forgive me, my king. I just could not refrain myself. The general's voice was sincere enough, but he didn't bother hiding the laughter in his gaze. He didn't catch me as one to ever take things seriously, Was all Eric deemed enough of a response to the amused wolf-born? I felt my own lips want to pull into a smile. 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸 didn't appear to be terrifying. The man beside him sighed and shook his head. The same one who shoved him out the door the day before. I am Finn, Lady Immerse. The king remained quiet as the black-eyed man introduced himself, his attitude more irritated with the male beside him than interested with me. I think I liked him the most. In charge of keeping this idiot in check. He snarled and shot his dark eyes at the still smiling 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸, who rolled his eyes. A job you seem to be lacking in lately. The king growled from beside me, but the insult was more directed at 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸 than Finn. And that is 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸's, Eric said on the side as he nodded to the last general standing at the table, his attention no longer on the fuming Finn and laughing 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸. 𝐿𝐲𝐼𝐸's was quiet, quieter than Delos and Terif, but he gave me a low bow anyways. His hair was a dark blonde, his blue eyes bright, but nowhere near that electric blue the king held. His stance screamed with pride and authority as Eric and Terif did. He took his job seriously, and he was proud of that. You all know this already, but this is Immerse, Lady Immerse. I expect her to be treated with just as much respect and loyalty as you do me. The king's voice was strong and firm and firm with such authority that not even the bugs running through the rafters would dare defy him. Just like before, they all crossed their right arm over their large chests and bowed towards us. Of course, my lord, they all affirmed before raising to their feet once again. Even 𝐿𝐷R looked serious for a moment. It wasn't long before the king was nodding at them to all sit before turning to look at me, his blue eyes glowing softly in something close to sadness. It made my chest suddenly ache. I have important matters I must discuss with them. I knew where this was going before he even finished his sentence, and I only hated myself for expecting something different. This would be the only encounter we would have today, the only time we would be able to see each other. And it was so brief and nerve-wracking I didn't want to count it. 𝐻𝐸 will show you back to your room. I didn't bother answering him, and only nodded as his second-in-command stood to his feet with a sad sit at me. But it was nice to meet you all, I murmured politely before turning for the door. 𝐻𝐸 right behind me. Don't worry, Lady Mre. We'll be seeing you again soon. I heard 𝐻𝐸 call from behind me, and didn't understand the sudden heat that rose to my cheeks. Shut up. Then hissed at him as we reached the door, and 𝐻𝐸 held it open for me. I was thankful for the smile their littler interaction first on my lips. It was a small reprieve from the hollow ache that was filling my chest. I didn't look back at them once, didn't look back at the king, and he didn't bother calling out any goodbyes. I understood his need to keep me hidden from others. Understood why he didn't want to risk being around me too often, but it still hurt. 𝐻𝐸, can I ask you something? I asked softly a moment later as I followed the large wolf, borne back to the marble staircase. Of course. Lady Mre. His tone was soft, easygoing, like he didn't necessarily have a problem in the world, and he was willing to take all of mine. I appreciated that. You're kind. Do they often reject their mates? I knew the answer before the general even spoke. It was written all over his stunned face, his body suddenly stopping and stilled as his eyes widened. No, they didn't often reject their other half, and if the look he was suddenly giving me was anything to go back, that simple notion was horrifying. No, we don't. Rejecting your destined one is the highest crime a wolf could ever commit, as it should be for all shifters. Oh, that makes sense then, why the king continued to keep me around. He didn't want to go against the wolf, born laws by rejecting his mate. The shifters I lived with, those I was raised around, did not treat mates in such a high regard. Sure, most of them did end up together, but it was not uncommon to reject the other either. I never understood that before. I grew up believing that since I was not a shifter, I would never have a destined one, and I did not understand why those lucky enough that did not want them. I understand now. Just because something in the universe decided to bind two souls together did not mean that they would always want the other. The king did not necessarily know what to do with me. I always had my doubts when it came to him. Some things he would say would make my heart flutter, and then other times I truly wanted to cry. You should clear your mind of such thoughts, my lady. It's almost unlawful to speak them. 𝐻𝐸 turned once again, the smile from before gone as he led me back towards my rooms. I frowned at my own thoughts, and the way my heart thumped achingly in my chest. I had never cared before, not really, not about mates or love or the king. Despite the general wonderment over what he had truly looked like, and if the rumors were true, I had been so carefree, so convinced the only people I would ever need were me and 𝐊𝐸𝐻. But now I wanted to curl up in a dark corner somewhere and never come out, and all because the king of the north kept throwing my thoughts and emotions in a whirlwind of confusion. Was this how the rest of my life would be? No, I didn't think so. Terif had said the king had searched for his mate before, long before, and 𝐊𝐸𝐻 take not finding her anymore. But he doesn't know what to do with now. I just had to be patient. Give him time, give us both time. You mentioned how different my culture is from yours. So did Terif. He said there are things I can and can't do in the kingdom. I started softly as I followed the large general down the hall, the tension in his shoulders slowly leaving. What sort of things? I knew Terif said that it was the king's place to tell me. but it did not appear that Eric and I would be having a conversation again anytime soon. Knowing Terif, he probably meant your behavior. Excuse me, 𝐻𝐻𝐬𝐬 chuckled. And just like that, the tension from my rejection question completed disappeared. Terif is a stickler for how people should act, especially mated couples. In the wolf culture, it is highly disrespectful for any mated couple to be seen showing affection to another without their mate's knowledge or approval. Affection in general. No, just that which can be interpreted in a suggestive way. Suggestive. I mulled the word over in my head. Mates did not cheat on each other. Or at least I didn't think they did. They didn't have a reason to. That person was literally their other half. Then a thought hit me. One that made my blood want to boil. Why that infuriating? Does Terif think I act that way? I all but demanded as my steps suddenly turned to angry stomps. I had not done anything to anyone that would appear to be suggestive. 𝐻𝐻𝐬𝐬 only laughed again. I do not know what goes on in that wolf's head. Nor do I want to. He is more moody than the king, and that's saying something. He could say that again. He said the king was old. Do you all age differently than other shifters? Or something? I asked softly as we finally turned down the hall that held my chambers. I was sure where the second-in-command stayed, but I felt bad for him always having to come get me. I'm sure it was a long walk. He paused for a moment, his brown eyes flickering to mine in uncertainty before glancing away again. Or something. I frowned. That doesn't answer my question at all. What is it with these people and never answering questions? Screw it. I'll ask anyway. Do you know how Terif saved me? I was sure he knew about the accident. I'm sure they all did, but I was still surprised he tried to deny it. I'm not sure I know what you're talking about. The guilty look in his eyes would suggest otherwise. That night we were attacked. The night my skull had been broken. Terif saved me and no one will tell me how. We finally stopped outside my room, and I knew I wasn't going to get much out of him when a tired sigh slipped past his lips. He looked so torn it actually made me feel bad for asking. But out of all the wolf-borns I had met, he was the only one bothering to hold an actual conversation with me. He used some pretty old magic. That is all I can say. Please don't ask for more. My lady. The plea in his voice was so genuine and sincere it actually made the questions die on my tongue. He did not hide his emotions as well as Terif, or the king, and I knew it would just upset him if I persisted until he caved. I am just tired of being in the dark.
I wish he would just talk to me.
It was too late when I realized what I said. I wish he would talk to me, not someone. I should have said someone. The pained and saddened look crossed 𝐻𝐻𝐬𝐬's brown eyes before he leaned over to hold my door for me. He will, in time, was all he said as I walked past him and into the dark. Lonely confines of my room. That's what he keeps saying. I mumbled distaphnially as I stared around the large space. I had a sickening feeling this would turn more into a prison than a home. It was quiet for a long moment after that, and I had actually thought that the general had left until he made an odd sound and let out another sigh. Would you like to tour the castle tomorrow? There are some parts that are off limits, but I know some beautiful spots, even in the heavy winter. I perked up immediately at that and shot him a grateful nod and smile. His dark brown eyes shined happily. That sounded lovely. Perhaps with 𝐻𝐻𝐬𝐬 on around, it wouldn't be too terribly lonely. And I was excited to explore the secrets of Eric's kingdom. Chapter 15. Would you like something to eat? 𝐻𝐻𝐬𝐬 asked for the second time that day as I sat on the cool stone of the bench hidden in the back of the snow-covered garden. I smiled up into the soft flakes falling from the sky. No, thank you. I could practically feel the brooding frown pull at his lips. You said that earlier. You must eat. He practically growled as his large, heavy body sat beside me, his giant frame taking up much of the room on the cold seat. A thin beam of light had peeked out through the dense snow clouds swirling overhead, and I refused to let 𝐻𝐻𝐬𝐬's grumpy demeanor ruin it. I will. Tonight. I'm just not very hungry today. Which was true. I was so excited about touring the castle that the thought of food never crossed my mind. Fine. But you will eat tonight. His tone held no room for argument, even though I wouldn't have anyway. This place is beautiful. I spoke softly a moment later as we both gazed at the white, covered trees and flowers. The general eased somewhat beside me. Yes, it is. These flowers only live in a harsh, cold environment. It's why the king filled the garden with them. Even when it's not winter, the mountain still snows. I knew that all too well. Even at the base of the mountain where my village sat, we would still get trickles of snow throughout the year. It was a beautiful sight. The trees would be covered in green leaves, the ground with soft green grass and flowers that sparkled in the sun, and then snow would gently fall over them, like a cool white blanket intent on keeping them safe. Come, I should get you inside before you get sick. I let out a small sigh as he stood to his feet and turned to me with a warm smile. You and Terif both seem to think I will get sick from anything. His brown eyes flashed and he let out a small chuckle as he held his hand out towards me. We do not mean to offend you. My lady, you are just very small and fragile. The king would have our heads if anything happened to you. I couldn't help but smile as my hand slipped into his and let him ease me to my feet. He let go immediately after. Maybe you don't, but Terif doesn't care whether he offends me or not. I think a part of him actually enjoys it. No, I doubt that's the case. Offending you would offend the king, and he would never upset North on purpose. That I did know. Besides, that grumpy wolf seems to like you. My steps fumbled at that simple statement, and I turned to him in bewilderment. Like me. You must be mistaking Terif for someone else, or you're completely blind. The only reason he can be remotely polite is because of the king. I scoffed and resisted the urge to roll my eyes as the large wolf led me back into the many halls of the castle. Perhaps, but he talks to you, whether it be considered polite or not. That's saying something. I frowned at his words, at the amused twinkle dancing in his brown eyes. Of course Terif talked to me, even if it was only to be rude at times. Or is it also considered against the law to converse with underlings? I don't understand. I grumbled as we walked slowly down the outer hall of the castle, the one with open windows so large they were taller than half the buildings in my village. Our Delta does not talk often, and if he does it's usually only to the king. He could think you deserved that same respect being Northwest's mate, but I have a feeling you hit a soft spot in his heart, Lady 𝐿𝐴. That notion was so ridiculous it made me want to laugh. Terif with any kind of soft spot. I didn't think so. Even so, the thought made me a little happy. Perhaps Terif and I could be friends after all. He saved my life and kept me safe the entire time away from the mountain, even if it was only for the king's benefit. I know you said not to ask about how Terif saved me again, but can I ask you something along that line? I spoke hesitantly as we wandered slowly along the castle's cold and empty corridors. My 𝐖𝐴 had made sure to only take me down the halls and terraces that no one would be wandering about in, even the servants. I was still to be kept one big secret, locked inside a beautiful icy prison. He let out a deep sigh beside me before reaching up to run his hand through his sandy brown hair. You may ask, but I can't promise that I will be able to answer. Fair enough. There was this night on the ship when Terif and I were traveling back to the mountain. I started quickly. I feared if I did not rush to speak, he would stop me before I could finish. I caught him and the king talking through this black, like stone thing. The king was there, but he was blue and shimmering. I had never seen anything like it before. I knew it wasn't necessarily a question, just a rare encounter, but I was hoping he would figure out what I was trying to ask. My 𝐖𝐴 licked his lips and slowed his pace until we both stood beside one of the long windows, his dark eyes glancing out at the frozen landscape instead of at me. Have you finished reading that book? My eyes widened at the question. Had the king told him about giving me the book? I'm sure he must have. But what did that have to do with anything? Not completely. I'm almost done. Why? He shuffled beside me, his thick arms crossing over his chest as he continued to stare out the window. That book is our history, our myth. It is so old no one really knows whether it is true or not. His tone held disbelief. but his eyes seemed to second-guess himself. But it is said that part of our great god 𝐿𝐺 lives in the king's bloodline, a piece of his soul passed down through generations. His voice was distant, his gaze locked on something far from here as his heavy body leaned casually against the stone pillar. I remembered reading about that, way back when Terif had first given me the book. I had just written it off as a fairy tale they told their children, a myth to ensure they would always respect their king. A part of their god lived inside of him. No one would disobey that. Do you believe that? I asked softly beside him as I gazed out at the snowy, dark landscape. Even in the dead of winter, 𝐊𝐺𝐼𝐬𝐺𝐿 kingdom was so beautiful. He paused for a moment, licked his lips and let out a short breath of air. Whether it is or not, the king has access to magic older than time. Perhaps a witch taught it to him years ago, and that book really is just a story full of myth. Either way, North can do things that most can't. Appearing as a blue mist when his body is on the opposite side of the world is just one of them. I see. That was more of an answer than I had hoped for. But even though it eased part of my curiosity, or only took its place, why did Eric have that kind of power? What else could he do? And then I had to reprimand myself for asking such thoughts. I sounded just like the elders and people of my village when the gold power emerged. It was always there now, always simpering just under the surface of my chest, ready to run to the king the moment he called for it. It was so odd, and I wish North did not feel the same about his own magic. Let's walk and talk of other things. My lady, smiling, happy 𝐿𝐺 was back, but I could see the quiet urge in his eyes to drop the subject. All right. I would stop asking for now, Amp. A days in the snow and ice-encrusted castle slowly turned into week filled with a lonely silence. I would see 𝐿𝐺 at least once a day. But other than that, my days were spent either walking aimlessly around my room or the hall just outside. It had been 2 weeks since my arrival, and I've only seen the king a handful of times. He would occasionally invite me to eat with him, but we talked very little and it never lasted long. I felt closer to him when I had lived in the village. At least then, the few times we had talked was longer and more meaningful to me. I sighed at the little seating room, my breath coming out as fog on the cold glass. 𝐿𝐺 had to run some errands for the king today, or at least that's what he had said. I was tired of sitting in my rooms and doing nothing. I wanted to go out, to walk around the snow and breathing in the crisp, cold air. And if I left the castle and its grounds, then no one would see me wandering around. I wouldn't technically be disobeying the king's wishes. I couldn't stop my ecstatic smile as I hopped off the cushioned seat and reached for the heavy cloak hanging in my wardrobe. My mind was made up. I was too tired of sitting here staring out the window aimlessly day after day, waiting for 𝐿𝐺 to entertain me, or hoping to hear from Eric. Besides, the snow was falling to hard and the sun had actually been out for over an hour. It was a beautiful day for a walk. Even so, I made sure to pull on extra socks over my feet before pulling the leather snow boots on under my thick wool and rest. It looked beautiful, but that didn't mean it was cold. The hall was deserted, like usual, when I slipped out of my room, the door closing softly behind me. An excited thrill shot down my spine as I walked quickly through the hall and around the corner. After 2 weeks with nothing to do, I was finally going to explore on my own. I tried to remember the way back to that hall full of statues and secret tunnel that Terif had first walked me through, and despite having to jump behind a corner a few times to avoid being seen by a servant, I found it relatively easily. Moving the statue that blocked the small wooden oar was another thing entirely. There has to be a button, or leather, or something. I grumbled under my breath as I let my gloved fingers run gently over the cool marble statue. After a few tenuous and stressful minutes of searching, I thought I had actually found it when the statue jerked and started to slide over, a wide smile pulling on my lips, until I heard the voices coming from the other side of the door. Panic surged through me as I jumped back hurriedly. The knob on the door rattled. Oh God, what was I going to do? Run? No time. Hide. Yes, hide. I quickly hurried to a few statues down the hall and jumped behind the largest one I could find as the secret tunnel opened. My eyes widened at the sight of the two generals who stepped out with the disgruntled looks plastered on their faces. What in the world had they been doing? He keeps disappearing like we don't notice. 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬 sighed as the wooden door closed softly behind him, and the king refuses to do anything about it. Terif's voice was a dark snarl, one I had surprisingly missed. Who would have thought sitting in my room for weeks on end with very few to talk to would make me actually miss the bipolar mess that was Terif? I watched as the always moody wolf born reached up and pressed the statue's nose. A victorious smile pulled at my lips as the marble stone rolled back over the door. At least I knew how to get to it now. He will. Since when did you start questioning him? They were walking slowly towards the entrance of hall. Just slowly to make the panic in my chest ease, but that didn't stop my longing to hear the rest of their conversation. I'm not questioning him, just voicing concerns. Terif grumbled as their heavy steps pulled to a stop just before the entrance of hall. My heart jerked. I wanted to hear what they were saying, but I was terrified what they would do if they found me. It couldn't have been too terribly bad, but I knew I was supposed to be wandering around alone, and they would tell the king. Then I would be in trouble. I heard 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬 let out a dark chuckle that slowly ebbed away into silence. He has a plan. He always does. It's just bad luck he found Lady Immerse in the middle of it. My breath caught in my throat at the mention of my name. Was that why there was such distance between the king and I? Because he has some big plan unfolding. Terif made a grunt-like noise in the back of his throat as his golden eyes glanced out to the hall in front of them, like he was making sure no one was coming to eavesdrop. I swished further behind the statue. It was a bad idea bringing her here. It is not safe, especially since North insists on letting him stay. The tone in the general's voice was not one I was accustomed to hearing from him. Concern. Terif was worried about me, and I was beyond confused as to why. 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬 was quiet for a moment, both of them just sort of staring down the hall, before he let out a sigh and leaned against the wall beside him. I agree, but he does not know about her and she is confined to her wing. She does not seem like one to disobey. Oops. Terif snorted and I actually saw his golden eyes roll before they snapped to the second in command. Your mind might change in another week. She is a nuisance who loves speaking out of term and getting into trouble. And just like that, my blood began to boil because of the arrogant jerk once again. How rude. 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬 laughed and leaned away from the wall with a shake of his head. And she thinks you hate her. Terif growled and shot his companion a dark scowl before turning back towards the hall. Whatever. I have to give the king our report. And you need to go check on her. He didn't bother waiting for 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬's response as he turned completely away and stalked off down the hall. Same old Terif. I watched quietly from behind the statue, waiting patiently for 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬 to leave also, but he didn't. My heart beat erratically in my chest as he turned slowly around and walked back down the hall, right for me. My breath was choking my throat as I pressed my back firmly against the wall and prayed. He didn't know I was there. My prayers were in vain. It's not nice to eavesdrop. My lady. 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬's head peeked around the statue I was hiding behind and nearly gave me a heart attack. I squeaked and clutched my hands tightly to my chest, before turning wide eyes on his accusing brown ones. I am sorry. I didn't mean to. The statue between us was sturdy enough for him to lean against and stare down at me with a narrow gaze. You know you're not supposed to be outside of your wing without an escort. He started scolding as he reached down to help pull me to my feet. Is it because of that guy you and Terif were talking about? I didn't bother trying to hide the fact that I heard them, or pretended to not know what they had been talking about. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. Still, I was surprised he didn't hesitate in answering. He's part of the reason why, and no, I'm not telling you anything else about the situation. The king has made it perfectly clear he does not want you involved. But yours, of course. I would be kept in the dark even more. What are you doing wandering around here anyway? I would have taken you this afternoon if you asked. I could hear the disappointment in his voice, and it surprisingly tugged at my heart. 𝐿𝐢𝐬𝐬 had become a dear friend in the past 2 weeks I had been here, and disappointing him actually hurt. I'm sorry. I was just tired of being stuck in my room. I wanted to go outside the grounds for a while. I knew any hope of that happening was completely squashed when a frown pulled at his full lips. It is dangerous for you to leave the castle grounds by yourself. It is dangerous for you to be wandering the castle by yourself. The staff and other wolf-borns are not used to seeing an unmated female walking around. Even if the king was worried about that guy, there would still be trouble. I let out a tired sigh and shook my head as I eased out into the middle of the beautiful statue hall. That seems to be the story of my life these days. All of a sudden, 𝐻𝐸𝐬𝐼 was the one giving me a remorseful and apologetic look. I am truly sorry. My lady, I understand none of this is easy on you. I wish the king knew of another way. I know 𝐻𝐸𝐬𝐼. It's all right. He remained silent after that and led me slowly back down the hall, leaving the secret tunnel far behind. Going would have been a bad idea anyway. I didn't know my way around the tunnels and I would have only gotten lost if I hadn't been caught by then. Terif's usually really good with sensing things. I'm surprised he didn't realize I was there. I started quietly a few moments later, if only to ease the tension between us. He has a lot on his mind. The king has been keeping he and the others busy lately. I doubt he would have noticed if you were standing right in front of him. Where is the king? I couldn't keep the curiosity from my voice, or the desperate need. I haven't seen him at all in the past few days, and he seemed just as busy as his generals. We had a messenger arrive sometime this morning with news of attacks from the Northern raiders. He has been dealing with that ever since. My heart skipped in my chest. The Northern raiders. They were a dangerous group of shifters who preyed on all villages and towns along the north. The king and other wolf-borns had fought them away from the mountain on more than one occasion, but they were starting their attacks again, and that meant another war could resurface at any moment. Are you hungry? Would you like me to have the kitchen prepare something? His question was sincere, but I knew he was asking to change the subject. Just another part of the king's life I was to know about. No, thank you. I'm all right. I was a little hungry, but when I tried to eat that morning my stomach only flipped in nausea. I was feeling well. I hadn't been for a few days, and the thought of food made my stomach turn. 𝐻𝐸𝐬𝐼 narrowed his eyes at me. Do not start this again. My lady, I expect you to eat 3 meals a day, or I will tell the king this time. I rolled my eyes at that as we pulled to a stop in front of my door, but his own worst turn. I knew he was being serious, and I knew he would tell the king. It's not that I had stopped eating. I just was hungry the first week I was here, and only ate at super. 𝐻𝐸𝐬𝐼 hadn't liked that at all. I was fine for a few days, until I started feeling queasy. And I will. Tomorrow. I just don't feel so well today. That's all. I assured him as he held the door open for me. I shot him a grateful smile and stepped into my room. He didn't look convinced. Are you going to tell the king about this? I asked softly as he stood propped against the wooden door. His dark eyes flashed briefly before he sighed and shook his head no. I should, but I understand why you felt the need to go off on your own. If you would like, I can take you outside tomorrow. Relief filled my heart at his words. He was going to tell the king I wouldn't have to go through his disapproving looks too, and he was going to escort me outside tomorrow. This was a win-win kind of situation. I gave him another grateful smile. Yes, please. I would like that very much.